evidence into a court if you are either the defendant or you are a witness who can be questioned by the defence. By this time, it was too late to bring Amber in as a witness, as a victim. And so as a tactical option, and I quote, they decided to secretly add her on the indictment, but not tell her, not arrest her, not caution her, not give her any legal representation. And they portrayed her in the trial, even though she didn't know it, as this older woman who was grooming and abusing children. She was never convicted, but then after the trial, to justify what they'd done, they then tried to pretend that she was a paedophile and take her children away from her. So I found out about that, Shaun, and I, after 18 months of going to everybody, you know, from the head of serious crime to the head of public protection to the chief constable, the Home Office, the IOPC, the Children's Commissioner, nobody wanted to know. And so basically I resigned. I was threatened with prison, that, you know, if you speak out, you will go to prison because this is confidential. Nobody should know this. And I had never been in that position. But at the end of the day, I think I said on the podcast that all I have is my conscience. And I knew that what I had seen was one of the most wicked things I had ever witnessed. And I decided, whatever the consequences, I was going to tell the truth. I was going to make the country aware. But more than that, or as much as that, I was going to fight for these girls to get some justice. So I went public. It kind of exploded. That was in 2013. It's never left me. And I have been on this treadmill now for the past 12 years. In 2022, the new chief constable, which was after we spoke actually, Shaun, but I managed to get the new chief constable to publicly acknowledge that that case had been borderline incompetent. All Amber's abuse was formally recorded with her as a victim. He apologised to Ruby, and the official inquiries, one in 2020 into Augusta and one in 2024, last year, into Rochdale, corroborated everything I had said as being completely and utterly truthful. But I lost everything. I lost my career and my income, my home. I lost my mental health, actually. I ended up in a little apartment with a lodger, living on, you know, next to nothing. But I wish I'd never had to do what I did, but I would still do the same today, Shaun, because it was the right thing to do. And, you know, it's been a difficult journey. And it still is difficult sometimes, because now, you know, there are people that will attack me or accuse me of doing things I haven't done, and I can't just come out and say it as it is. I've got to be respectful of other people. But I do believe that using my voice has brought awareness, and it's put pressure on the authorities, who, for me, I want to see senior police officers, senior social workers charged with gross criminal neglect. I want to see them in front of a criminal court, and I want to see them in prison for having failed in their duty to protect generations of children, and lie about that as well and cover it up. So I guess that's a whistle-stop tour through. I mean, people can read my book, but that stops at 2019, at which point I started my own charity, Shaun, the Maggie Oliver Foundation. And in the last 5 years, we've now fought for and supported well over 4,000 victims and survivors who basically have nowhere to go. So I feel that I'm an expert in this field. I still have to take flack from people. I mean, you heard the Prime Minister, you know, last week saying, you know, all these right-wing extremists who are jumping on a bandwagon. Well, I'm no right-wing extremist, and nor are the victims and survivors who have been fighting to be heard for decades, actually. So I guess that's kind of a summary, really. Is that a good run through?
Yeah, excellent run through. And viewers, you know, we've got viewers all around the world who may not be familiar with this culture that has been created from the top, whereby these monsters are able to get away with these things because of government policy. Now, Elon Musk, etc., has been calling this stuff out. But just to give viewers around the world an example of the way these politicians who have enabled this culture to be created, I'm just going to put a video on the screen, show it to Maggie after we play it, and we'll get Maggie's thoughts. I don't know if you've seen this one already,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
this is London Mayor Sadiq Khan getting asked about these gangs, and rather than just say, "Yeah, I acknowledge these gangs exist. There's this many gangs. They're doing this. We need to take this action." This is the idiotic double speak going round in circles, given to prevent any progress in this area that really needs progress at all. So I'm going to play it now. And the viewers, you can see yourselves what we're dealing with here in this country.
Exactly how much clearer do you want me to be? So I asked you this question last week and you found every which way but not to answer it. Just how many grooming gangs have we got in London?
So the situation in London in relation to young people being groomed is different to the parts of the country. So what we have in London is young people being groomed, use your words, not mine, to be using county lines in relation to sometimes...
Okay, let me make it clear. Sorry, I wasn't clear enough. I was told I shouldn't be saying rape gangs. They are rape gangs. I'm talking about rape gangs. I'm not talking about country lines. But to go back, nobody likes me saying rape gangs, although they are rape gangs, grooming gangs that I would call rape gangs. Tell me about them. How many of those have we got? Not country lines, those particular groups.
To avoid any misunderstanding, can she define what she means by that?
Yes, if you look at what's gone on in Rotherham, where there are people taking young girls, grooming them for sex, that is what I'm talking about.
We know in London there are issues about exploitation of young people, but they're not as defined by the member in her definition of what those types of gangs are.
So are you saying we haven't got the same sort of gangs that are in Rotherham, Bradford and lots of other places in the country?
Just for what's misunderstanding, what does she mean by that?
You know full well what I mean by that. It's all over the television. You know exactly what I mean by that. These gangs of people that are grooming young girls for sex. Do we actually have those in London?
Today we need to give a full answer. Can she be clear what she means by that? I'm not clear what she means.
How much clearer do you want me to be? Look at the gangs that they've uncovered in other parts of the country. Do we have those gangs in London? It's a simple question. The answer is very simple. It's yes or no. I'm not asking you where those gangs are because the police might...
Well, you get the idea there of what I'm trying to say. I mean, when you see something like that, Maggie, this guy won't even acknowledge the existence of the gangs in this day and age. What do you think when you see that?
You know what, Shaun, that has, in my opinion, that I call it willful blindness, you know, that has threaded through these conversations for decades. I know that Anne Cryer tried to highlight this in Keighley in the late 90s and the early 2000s, and she was accused of being a racist, and yet there was a documentary team that were following a social services team and had uncovered this particular kind of abuse, and there was an absolute determination to turn away from it, and I think that there are two reasons that feed into that. I think the being not wanting to be accused of being racist is definitely one of them. But I think the other factor is a class judgment, a judgment of these children who were mainly from poor working class areas. On Augusta, for instance, they were all living in children's homes, you know, in care. And I use that word very reluctantly because nobody cared about them. So they were the forgotten children. Nobody was fighting their corner, so they didn't matter. And rather than grasp the nettle and address this particular kind of abuse, they would prefer to turn away. Now, I always qualify it, as you know, Shaun, by saying that paedophiles come in all shapes and sizes, in all ethnicities. We've just had the Archbishop of Canterbury resign for failing to highlight or, child abuse. We had the Catholic Church. We had Jeffrey Epstein, Harvey Weinstein, all of these. For me, as a police officer, when I joined the police, as every other police officer, you swear an oath of attestation, you promise, you swear that you will uphold the law, that you will act with integrity, with fairness, uphold fundamental human rights. That's what I promised to do. I didn't promise to do as I was told, and I didn't promise to turn away from a child of 11, 12, 13 was being raped on a daily basis and just, pretend it wasn't happening. So when I started, what I've heard Sadiq Khan saying there is what I encountered when I first went public, what Anne Cryer encountered when she went to Parliament, even Sarah Champion, who did an article in the paper and she lost her post in the shadow cabinet. All those things have meant that this conversation has not been had. So I remember the first time when I went public, the chief constable, vilifying me after the documentary, was given a right of reply, and he said that I was this woman who had been bereaved. I'd become too emotionally involved. He didn't for one moment acknowledge what I had been to him to tell him about, which now is recognised as incompetent. He blamed me, just as all the children have been blamed. And the conversations that I had in the interviews, I would be asked to talk about the Asian grooming gangs. Sorry, Shaun, but I will.
No, you're fine. Keep going. Keep going.
And I would always stop them and say, they're actually not Asian. I don't see Japanese or Chinese or Thai people in these, abusing in this way. They are predominantly Pakistani Muslim men. I've seen some, Afghanistani possibly, but for me, the link is that they are from a very similar cultural background. And I think without having the conversations, we are never going to understand why it happens. And the other thing that I've been very, very vocal about over the last few weeks, and have been for a few years, is that up until today, even now, the police do not record the ethnicity, the occupation, the background, the absolute detail, the bare minimal details of all abusers and all of victims. Because without those statistics, people will say, like Sadiq Khan or other officials, well, the data doesn't show that. But we need the data. And if it shows that, this is not a problem, well, at least the data will be there. Every other crime, they have the detail recorded. If it's a burglary or if it's a robbery, you record the detail as a police officer. But this, and I highlighted this to the Home Office in 2013. We are 12 years further on now. I've been through, numerous inquiries, including the National Abuse Inquiry, and there is still a determination to try to muddy the waters and not address the real issues in this. And the losers always are the children, Shaun.
Yeah, I mean, that was just a slap in the face to the public, what he said. That in this day and age, when this is one of the most talked about things in the world, when Elon Musk was tweeting it every day, they all know what it is. That's like him saying, I don't know what the LA fires are. Can you define that for me, please? And then you give a definition. And he says, well, I'm not quite sure that's... And just round and round and round. I mean, maybe 10, 20 years ago, he could have got away with saying things like that. But how on earth can he get away with saying... Does he just think the public are completely stupid that they're going to listen to him and believe that he's actually being honest?
I think the difference, Shaun, now is that the public are no longer stupid. I think there is a real awareness throughout the country, and I'm not a party political person. I will it's the whole shebang. Conservatives, Labour, Conservative were in government for years, throughout most of my time speaking out about this, and they did nothing about it. Labour are now in. They've been in 6-7 months. They have tried, even up to last week, to pretend that it doesn't happen and accuse those who are speaking about it of being far-right extremists. And furthermore, you know, Keir Starmer, who is now our Prime Minister, unfortunately, he was the Director of Public Prosecutions when I worked on the Rochdale case. So those decisions that were made not to charge a man who got a 13-year-old with special needs pregnant, where we had a fetus, where we had DNA, where he was allowed to be, you know, be released from prison in less than 4 years and go back to Rochdale, where he has fought extradition, arguing that his son should have, he's a role model for his son and he's entitled to a family life under human rights legislation. Well, I'm sorry, I disagree on every level. When you do something like this, and it wasn't just to one little girl, it was to many. When you do something like this, I'm sorry, your human rights go back of the queue. And if you want a family life, take your children back to the place where you've come. You should not be allowed to have millions in legal aid when the little girl who he got pregnant didn't even know he was out of prison. She went into the local supermarket. Unbeknown to her, he's back in Rochdale. She walked round the end of an aisle and came face to face with the man who got her pregnant when she was 13 and had a complete and utter meltdown. Nobody had told her. Nobody had given her a say in where he was going. Our whole system, and I know we're talking about this particular kind of abuse, but Shaun, our whole criminal justice system is broken. Every victim of sexual crime is being failed on a monumental scale. The sentences are inadequate, the charges are inadequate, the prisons are full, the judges, I don't know what planet they live on. So, you know, you can hear my voice getting more and more angry, and that's because I have met many of these victims and I have sat in rooms with them, and now in my charity we support them through emotional support. Some of them 40, 50, 60, 70 years old who are still carrying that pain and that trauma, and mostly not caused obviously by the abuse, but massively magnified and by the lack of care and the lack of punishment for their abusers, and for being blamed by the agencies that are meant to protect them. That's what causes the main trauma for these victims. And I would, you know, anybody who's listening to you, if they feel that they need emotional support, please self-refer to our foundation via our website. We have got an incredible team. I've got 30 volunteer ambassadors. 70% are themselves survivors of all kinds of sexual abuse. So within the family, you know, within sport, professional abuse, this kind of abuse. But every victim who is being failed by our protective agencies is damaged at least as much by that as they are by the crime itself. And that's what breaks my heart, because we should not be turning away from these children.
So Maggie, would you say then that since we spoke to you and did the podcast 5 years ago, that things have remained in place to allow this to flourish by the government?
Yes, I mean, I know that, you know, the government will always say these are historical crimes. They're not historical. And because of the work I do in my charity, I know they're not historical. They're going on today. I think what I would say, Shaun, is that the you know, grooming it's a process where a vulnerable child is targeted and identified because they are vulnerable. The predators spot that easily and they befriend them. They give them maybe a little trinket. They might get them a pizza. They might take them for a ride in a fancy car. Then the boyfriend wants payback time. So this child is out of the depth, and before they know where they're at, they're being passed around a room of 20 men, and they're using drink to mask the pain. It often will lead into a very, very dark place from which some never escape. But what I would say is that back in the Augusta days, the children that were in the children's home, they would walk out the gates and there'd be these men parked in a car across the road from the gates of the children's home. And everybody knew what was happening. The care home staff, the social workers, the police, nobody wanted to do anything. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't still go on, because it does. But a great deal of the grooming of the child begins now online because it's less risky. They can befriend that child over, I think Snapchat's a favorite, because they can delete it. There's no record. But then it evolves into, oh, send us a photograph. And you know, we had a case recently of an 11-year-old who was groomed and befriended by somebody online who she thought was just a little bit older than her. She was coerced into sending a photograph. Then she was being blackmailed that this photograph will be sent to her family and all her school friends. And she was on the verge of meeting him for fear of those threats being carried out. Fortunately, her dad, it was a granddad actually, heard the phone beeping and took the phone off her at night. And he saw all these messages and he called the police. But do you know what, Shaun? The police walked into that house and walked up to that little 11-year-old girl who was terrified. Bear in mind, her granddad and her dad had seen very inappropriate photographs of her. She was completely mortified. And the police officer said to the dad, we don't want to speak to you. We want to speak to your daughter. And they went straight up to this little girl and said, right, you know why we're here. Are you aware that you've committed criminal acts by sending those photographs on your phone? But if you remove them, delete them from your phone, delete your computer, we will say no more about it. So the dad threw them out. And that little girl, her dad came to the foundation and we fought her corner. And when we finally managed to get them to take notice of that case, there were, I think it was 36 men in a grooming gang that were behind that one man sending messages. So the grooming and the child abuse is still going on and it destroys lives. But the methods of drawing the children in, there are other methods now, because back in 2005, you know, we didn't have smartphones. We couldn't take photographs on them. You know, things have evolved and they are very difficult crimes to prosecute. I am not saying otherwise. But for me, we need care of every victim. And your listeners might be surprised to know that in the UK, that only 2 in every reported 100 rapes ever reaches trial. That's 98 that don't.